Thank you very much for attending this week's Charla. I should say before I introduce our speaker that this week's Charla is part of a two-year project that the Center for Latin American Studies at the University of Arizona is organizing around Central American studies and specifically Central American language diversity. And I put in the chat and hopefully you can see it. If not, I will put it in again. My email for any students, particularly who are in the audience, who are interested in learning more about our Central America Studies certificate and also the possibility of Maya language study through the University of Arizona, either in the summer or next year during the semester. So thanks again, everyone, for attending today's Charla. Let me introduce our speaker. It's really a great pleasure to have Robert Henderson with us, who is our colleague at the University of Arizona. He's an Associate Professor of Linguistics, and he's been working for many years studying Mayan languages in Guatemala. And this talk today is part of a larger project that he's doing, funded by the National Science Foundation, on endangered languages. And I should also say that Robert speaks fluently Maya Cachiquel and Maya Quiche, and he will be teaching a course on Mayan languages next year. And maybe we could ask him a little bit more about that at the end of the talk. So I'm very thrilled that we can hear about some of his research and that we could include this event as part of our series highlighting language diversity in Central America. So I will ask people while the talk is going on to please turn off your cameras and mute your microphones. And then in the Q&A discussion, you're welcome to turn your cameras back on. So thank you. Robert, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Okay, it's good to see everyone. Thanks for coming to this talk. This is joint work with a colleague, co-PI, Ryan Bennett at UC Santa Cruz, and Meg Harvey, who's a grad student in linguistics here at University of Arizona. So has been our graduate RA for a couple years. So a little bit of background. I'll be talking today about Uspanteco, in particular the sound system of Uspanteco. Uspanteco is not known as Uspanteco in the language itself. They call their language Tsununkap, sweet hummingbird. That's what it means. And it's a Quichean branch Mayan language spoken in Guatemala. I have a map here of Guatemala. So you can see in San Miguel is this little strip here. And this is sort of the departamento, which is this long little thing. So this is, this is the municipality. It's actually huge. And this is the seat of the municipality. It's in the larger, the department is much larger. But yeah, this is the municipality. If you don't know about Quichean languages, this is a chart of the tree of the Mayan languages. Quichean is this sort of sub-branch of the Eastern languages. You might be familiar with Cachiquel or Quiche, which were languages that were already mentioned. Uspanteco here is sort of much more distantly related. So Uspanteco, we think, probably broke away from the Quichean languages at sort of the root. So it is sort of very distantly related to, distantly related to Quiche, Cachiquel, Tzutujil. And one thing we'll see a little bit in this talk, or maybe I'll talk more about it later, is Uspanteco probably historically has been in quite a lot of contact with Mayan languages, in particular Ixil. So there's some aspects of the language that are Ixil, and they very clearly, they've borrowed quite a bit of words and stuff. And even the core topic of this talk might have been borrowed or at least influenced by Ixil. Okay, so there's a little more about Uspanteco. There's roughly 1,500 to 4,000 speakers of the language. The language is endangered, and it's sort of an interesting sort of sociolinguistic situation for Guatemala because the language that is sort of the majority language, the language that is actually placing Uspanteco in danger is basically Quiche, primarily Quiche. So, Uspantana is a town where basically everyone speaks the Mayan language. There's a lot of Spanish bilingualism as well, but the children are learning Quiche and Spanish and not Uspanteco. So they're sort of losing speakers, especially in the San Miguel itself. In sort of areas here to the north, an area called Las Pacayas, there are more children who speak the language, but Quiche is basically you find almost no one who's, actually I think I would go as far as to say you find no one who speaks just Uspanteco or just Uspanteco in Spanish. All Uspantecos are bilingual or trilingual in Quiche and either K'chi or Ixil, as the case may be, depending on sort of family relations. So the background, I'll be presenting some work based on this sort of 4-year NSF grant we've been working on to document phonetics and phonology of Uspanteco. But I was working on Uspanteco for even a couple years before that. As usual with a grant, you do some research and then you write the grant and say, I'm going to do some research, part of which I've already done, okay? Because you have to have sort of pilot work. And why is Uspanteco special? That's kind of some stuff I want to talk about today. The language has a tone system, which is unique to Mayan languages of Guatemala. So it has tone, so you can distinguish words based on your pitch of your voice. And Yucatec famously has tones, but the languages of Guatemala have not previously been described as having tones, which is something like 24 different Mayan languages, though maybe not anymore. I think and partially due to our work, but also just in discussions with people have been more interested in tone, and there might be sort of incipient tone systems in other Mayan languages of Guatemala. In particular, there's a town called Cunen. You hear that they speak Quiche there. But actually, maybe it'd be better called Cunanteco. And in this language, Cunanteco, this variety of Quiche might have tones like Uspanteco does. So that's sort of an interesting potential development that we sort of are excited about. Why else is this language interesting, or the tone system is interesting? It coexists with a stress system. Here we call it weight sensitive. What we mean by this is that certain syllables are considered heavy, for instance, if they have a long vowel, okay, versus a short vowel. If you've done any sort of scansion in poetics, you're probably familiar with sort of heavy, light syllables. The tone system interacts with notions of heaviness and lightness in syllables. And this is typologically rare. A lot of languages that have tone systems tend to have very stripped down stress systems. And languages with really sort of wild stress systems tend to not have tone systems. It's like you get one or the other. And in Uspanteco, they sort of coexist. So that's kind of interesting. And also the tone system we'll see interacts with morphology, sort of the parts of words in interesting ways. And the morphology itself is quite interesting. Perhaps we kind of have a mixed language status with Quiche in some aspects. We think the language is, in fact, quite endangered due to Quiche, and we have a lot of language mixing. And this is cool because it's something that hasn't been studied as much, right? So we think that the tone system is more endangered than the language itself. What we mean by this is that there's a lot of speakers of Uspanteco who don't have tones anymore. And so this is sort of an interesting case where you get kind of attrition of a subsystem of the grammar. People still speak Uspanteco, but they speak an Uspanteco that doesn't have tones, probably under influence from Quiche. And so it's kind of an important situation to document how do sort of subsystems of a language undergo attrition. It hasn't been studied as much as sort of as other things. So. And just to give you an example of what Uspantan looks like, I'm going to try to play this from YouTube. We'll see how this works because I'm in full screen mode due to the PowerPoint. But we were selected as a highlight of sort of a documenting endangered languages program, a grant, and you can kind of see in this photo, in this little video, some pictures of Uspantan, and I thought people would like to see that. So I will play this. It's not going to work, of course. I will have to maybe I can share this in a slightly different way. So everyone, please bear with me and I'll do a new share. Oh, let me do a new share where I share my sound. It is sharing, quite good. Okay, so hopefully people can see this. So yeah, a quote from me about what we're doing. So this is some in the countryside, grow corn. This is the town center in Uspantan. At San Miguel. This is one of our collaborators, Roshosh, and we're fitting her with this electroglottography. Here's an example.
Kapi, lek, katam.
Casar direct, casar devolver. Entonces, en casar direct. ¿Nemot pisa? Casar direct, devolver. Casar verbo, devolver. Chocatin direct, casar chuer. Recach, tinchap, entonces direct per, casar, me lo devolvió. Chatat, nemot pisa? Nemot, nechki tinti manere. Chao. Nechki tinti manere? Y nechki tinti manere?
Okay. Okay, so that was just, you got to hear the language a little bit. I thought that would be nice for people to hear and see sort of a little bit about Uspantan. And so now I will go in. I'm hearing a weird sound. Oh, it's still playing. That's my problem. Okay, I'm back. Playing from the current slide. Great. So what are the goals of this talk? What I'd like to do is present the tone system of Uspanteco and sort of our main conclusions about it. That's sort of the new results. And then if we have time, I want to present some new work on vowel deletion in Uspanteco, which is related to the tone system. And overall, you'll get sort of 2 doses of Uspanteco phonetics and phonology, and understand that are sort of 2 aspects of the language that make it quite different from related Quichean languages and make it sort of very special. Because this is just not seen elsewhere in closely related languages or other languages of Guatemala. Okay, so Guatemala. So I mentioned this is the only language in Guatemala with lexical tone, though like I said, this might be different. And I'll give you an example of this. So this is the word meaning his or her head, and there's no tone here. Stress is final. So you'll hear ichbat. Yeah. With the stress on the final syllable. Ba. We can contrast this to a tone-bearing syllable, which is very similar. So ichba, and then we have my head, which is possessed. And here this in has this little accent mark. It bears tone, and you can hear a very qualitatively different kind of sound here. Imba, right? You hear that high, that rise, which you can see in this picture. So this is sort of giving you the frequency of the sound, which is related to how fast your vocal folds are opening and closing. You get this rising tone. So just one more time. Okay, so that's an example of the tone. What have previous authors said about the tone system? There's been a lot of proposals out there going back to the 70s. Grimes and also Campbell, sort of 2 well-known Mesoamerican linguists and Mayan linguists, they argue that there's actually 2 tones in the language. There's a high-low tone, so where you start high and go low, or a low tone going to a high tone. And they say that you get the low going to the high on short vowels. We saw an example of this here. This is a short vowel. E is a single vowel. Low, high. And then they argue that you get a high-low on long vowels. We haven't seen an example of long vowels, but we'll see one maybe in a little bit. Yeah, so that was sort of argued there. Kan Pisha in her 2006 grammar argued that maybe there is a high tone and versus a 0 contrast on short vowels. So like the one we just saw, there's just a bare high tone. So some short vowels have a high tone, other short vowels have no tone. And then on long vowels, there's sort of a high-low, right? So you start high, go low on long vowels. So one of the main advances of our work is that we found a way to motivate a much simpler system where we only have one tone in Uspanteco, just a high tone. Okay, so just to show you sort of one advance of this research project is we think this is pretty solid. There's only one tone in Uspanteco, and it's high. So some syllables bear a high tone, other ones bear no tone. Let's look at some examples and I'll try to motivate this. So first I have to tell you a little bit about stress. Okay, so tone is going to interact with both vowel length and stress. So in Uspanteco, words have final stress by default. This means dead, and it's kaminek. And the final syllable bears stress. Kaminek, kaminek. You hear nek, nek is the stress syllable. Kaminek. Yep, okay. Long vowels in Uspanteco are restricted to final stress syllables. So you're only allowed to have a long vowel. Here we have kechelach, this long vowel, ach. We write it with a double A. In the IPA, you write it with these 2 little dots. A long vowel can only be stressed, and because stress tends to be final, in Uspanteco, you get final only vowels, long vowels at the ends of words. So here, kechelach. Kechelach, kechelach, This is a long vowel. Okay. Oops, there's no slide there for some reason. Okay. What you see here is that there's a high tone contrast on stressed final vowels, these long vowels that we've seen before. So here we have grass, ichach, inchach. These we have final stress, and you can actually compare this. So this is a non-tonal one. My or his or her gum, ich kach. Long vowel here, this ah, and there's no tone. And when you have a tone vowel, ash, here there's a long vowel which bears tone. You hear that this is a higher pitch. This is the same speaker. There's a kind of cha. It's a significant, and you can see it here in the hertz here. So this is like whatever 240 or something. Compared to this, which is sort of less than 200 hertz. Okay, so you have this sort of higher tone here. So this shows a tonal contrast on the final syllable of long vowels. But what's interesting is that when you have short vowels, you never get tone on a short vowel, okay, at the end of a word. Okay, so when you have short vowels, tone always moves to the penultimate syllable, and you get stress and tone on the penultimate syllable. So let's look at some examples of this. Here we have fingernail, and it can be possessed. Okay, and underlyingly, fingernail is ishkek, fingernail. But when you do possession, it bears tone. So the possessive marker W, we here, W bears a tone. And what it does is it introduces this tone on the penultimate syllable, and the stress also retracts to go on that syllable. So this is wishkek with tone on the first syllable. And I think we have a recording of this. Oh, we have a different example in the recording. Similar idea, abach is stone. You hear stress on the final syllable. If we possess it, oh no, yeah, this is a different word, but if we possess a word like your name, which is very similar, we get so this is you probably heard that. It's this very sharp rise. Yeah, your name. Okay, so yeah, these sound quite different. And notice though that the stress now is on this penultimate syllable, not on the final syllable, and also it bears tone. Okay, so toned short vowels cause retraction of stress. Note that tone on these short vowels is not just stress shift. You might think, oh, maybe you're just shifting stress and that's just an auditory hallucination. These examples show that that's not the case. You'll see that tulul, you have this means banana, is very flat. There's no pitch movement here. But if you say inzi, my dog, inzi, you have a high tone here. It's stressed and high tone. And here the pitch is much lower, so it's not flat anymore. Okay, so what's going on here, we think, is that actually we can say that there's only a single tone. And what we want to say then is tone always falls on the penultimate mora of the word. Once again, maybe a phonetics term you're not familiar with. A mora, you can think of it as like a unit of weight. Okay, maybe you remember, I don't know, taking Latin and chanting, arma virum queca no troiae, like no troiae. Those are double weights. They're longs. And then arma vi, those are shorts. Okay, so you can think of a long unit of time as 2 moras. A short unit of time is 1 mora. Long vowels, okay, have 2 moras, and short vowels only have 1 mora. Okay. So if you have a word with 2 syllables, okay, at the end, and you want to put the tone on the second mora, you have to put the tone on the first syllable, okay, of a 2-syllable word. So you get retraction of the tone. If you have a long vowel at the end of the word, you have 2 moras inside that long vowel. So you can just put the tone on the first mora of the long vowel. I mean, we think this explains what previous authors have been hearing. Okay, people remember, if you remember, previous authors have said maybe those long vowels have a high-low tone. That makes sense. If you have a vowel with 2 moras and you put tone on the first mora, you'll hear it high, and then as you go to the second mora, it will fall down and go low. Okay, but if you have a 2-syllable word, you'll hear a high tone on the first syllable, and the second syllable is not necessarily connected to the first syllable in a way that perceptually that makes you think, oh, there's like a high-low there, because they're not sort of in the same sound, in the same long vowel. So that's our explanation for this. And this has this nice, the generalization holds up sort of across the language that always with a short vowel, you get a tone on the penult. With a long vowel, it goes on the final syllable. So that's kind of nice. Okay, so far I've given you a phonological description of the tone and some hypotheses about the phonetics. But what does it actually look like acoustically, though, right? So I've done phonology here. Now we'll do some phonetics. I'd like to be able to say, oh, a high tone in Uspanteco involves, I don't know, some pitch movement of whatever hertz. Okay. The important thing here is we can't just measure it, okay? Because there are lots of confounds. You might say, oh, we'll just have a person like say some words and then record and then, extract the pitch. You can't do this. And I'll give you some examples of why this is really hard to do. So, a common linguistic method of working is use word lists. I give you a list of words and I ask you to read them. You go, I don't know, cup, face mask, wallet, phone. I'm just saying things that are in my room. When people read a word list, what they tend to do is they have a very special intonation. People even call it list intonation. Generally, in English, it's da, 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 right? High, 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 low. And you see this in Uspanteco as well. And the final word of a word list, which here we have a final word, comb, which is supposed to, comb does not have tone, but it's final on the word list, and you see this fall, okay?
Sharp.
Right, so the person said something like, corn, beans, comb, okay? Like when you read the word list, your final word has a falling tone. And not surprisingly, if you put a toned word in this context, you'll get a weird pitch thing. So shop, vomit, okay, a bear's tone. But if it's final in a word list, you kind of get, look, you can see here, maybe it's trying to have a rise or something, but it sort of, the position it occurs in this in this context sort of overrides the underlying tone.
Sharp.
It's falling because it's final in the word list. Okay, here's an example of medial in the word list. Right, so here's a non-tonal word, his or her comb, and here it's kind of high.
Sharp.
But that's because it's medial in the word list, not final. Medial words tend to have a high kind of intonational rise to them. Same thing for the toned word vomit.
Sharp.
It's much higher. So what you see here, like here's the final in the word list.
Sharp.
Medial.
Sharp.
Okay, so, lexical, what I'm trying to point out here is that lexical facts about pitch, a word lexically says, I'm a word that has to have a pitch movement on it. Well, sometimes those pitch movements can get overridden by concerns at the level of the utterance, right? So certain sort of utterance types have pitches associated with them, and those can overwrite what the lexical item wants. So we have to control for this. Here's another example of why we need to control for this. In all Quichean languages, or at least I'm going to say all, in core Quichean, Quiche, Tutuhil, Uspanteco, Tutuhil, Cachiquel, but Uspanteco as well, at the ends of utterances, you get a final high tone. Okay, this is called a boundary tone. So at the edge of your intonational phrase. Also, you get a boundary tone here because this is sort of in a focus position. But here we have Nimak chakrak la yachli, the big children of Li. None of these words have tones in them. Okay, but you see the pitch is kind of all over the place. That's because that's just what I was saying. We change our intonation. We use pitch also for doing intonational sort of prominences. And at the end of the word, at the end of the clause, you get this rise. One more time. Yeah, that final rise. And so you might expect if you try to put a word here that has tone in the final position of a sentence, you are going to be, it's going to get obliterated by this higher level intonational contour. Okay, so you just have to control for all these things if you want to measure tone in Uspanteco. It's something we struggled with for a long time. Okay, so I'll give you our solution to this and present a little study that we did examining this word level facts about tone under sort of different intonational and discourse conditions. So we want to contrast phrasal position. So medial position versus final position, we expect that to interact with intonation. I've given you an example of this before. Final words should have a higher tone than sort of medial words. And then information structure is also expected to interact with intonational contours. And here we mean given or focused. Basically, linguists use a given to mean information that has been previously mentioned, where the focused information is the new information. So if I tell a story, yesterday I talked to my friend John. John told me blah, blah, blah. In the second clause, when I mention John again, he's given because I've mentioned him before. Whatever I say John did, that's sort of the new information. Cross-linguistically, given information tends to have depressed pitch, but focused information, new information tends to have a higher pitch. Okay, we expect that to interact with tone because both of those are recruiting pitch to do what they want to do. So here is our, we kind of have 4 classes of words we want to study in those contexts I just mentioned. So we have no toned words with short vowels. So here we have the word hot, keten, keten. We have a toned version with 2 short vowels, kalak, kalak, our cup. We have a long vowel with no tone, kapop, kapop, our sleeping mat. And then we have a toned long vowel, corn husk is hok, possessed is kahok, kahok, which will have a tone on the long vowel. So we have words of, we used various words that fit into one of these 4 categories. Okay, and we cross them with the 2 positions we want to talk about. So those target words would then either occur in a sentence final position or a sentence medial position, a discourse given condition, or a focus condition. So here's an example of this, right? So this would be an example where it's given information in final position. So if I ask you the question, tikasu kashot, do we clean our komal? You would answer, chin, tikasu kashot. Yes, we clean our komal. Okay, and here, kashot is given because we mentioned the word before, and here we mentioned it again, so it's given information, okay, and it's final position. Okay, you could also put a word in focus position, in focus context, in medial position. Here's an example. Nen kancha wili chat. What did you see on the bed? And I could answer that with shin wil sukuk li chat. Shin wil sukuk li chat. I saw a louse on the bed. Here, the word louse, sukuk, is focused information because it's not previously mentioned. So the previous clause does not say that word. And it's in the medial position. It's sort of in the middle of the clause. Okay, so this is sort of 2 of the 4 matrix sort of scenario, but you get the idea, hopefully. We had a native speaker of Uspanteco read from a list of these question prompts, and then participants responded by translating pre-prepared answer from Spanish to Uspanteco. So basically, we had our colleague, Roshosh, she would say tikasu kashot, and then a participant would say chin tikasu kashot, like translating, okay, from Spanish, okay. So they're reading scripts, but we needed to have the question and answer because we found that we elicited much more natural conversation when we had a person interacting with the participant in the study in Uspanteco rather than just asking people to translate stuff out of the blue. It's not a real, you really need to put it in the discourse, right? Like we want to hear that it's given in a sort of a mini conversation if you want to elicit the right kind of response. Okay, so we had 8 speakers of Uspanteco participate in the study. I had some results. So I'm not going to go through all the results. I just want to give a flavor of sort of what sort of these types of results look like. Maybe you've never seen stuff like this before. But what I have here is I have charts. So these are pitch. We took all 8 speakers and we averaged their pitch over the target words. We averaged it and also normalized it, right? Because men have slightly lower pitch on average than women. So we want to sort of normalize for the speaker. Also, rate of speech can alter pitch and is relevant. So we sort of normalize for rate of speech for your sort of base pitch. And we can get these graphs where the gray is like a confidence interval. Okay, so if the 2 lines overlap, if the gray overlaps, it tells us we can't distinguish those statistically, those 2 pitch tracks. But if they diverge, then we can say, oh yeah, those look different. So I'm just going to look at the long vowel data here in interest of time. And also the matrix here, these are the given and focused, and this is medial and final. So let's point out some things. What you see here is that in general, there's a kind of trend. Oh, and tones are the tone vowels or toned words have the dashed line. In general, there's a trend for toned to be higher, right? So you notice in at least in all four of them, at some point, the toned vowel is higher than the non-toned, or a toned word has higher pitch than the non-toned word. And in no place do we get the reverse. So that's good. These tone vowels tend towards a higher pitch. In a given context here, which is the word has been previously mentioned, in a medial position, okay, that's kind of the best case scenario here. And we clearly see that the tone vowel is just higher. And also maybe we see a little fall here. Maybe there's like a high, low, just like previous listeners to the language had thought they heard. Okay. In final position, remember this is given, so this is a previously mentioned word at the end of the utterance. Notice here that at the end of the utterance, the difference has been obliterated between a toned and non-toned vowel. That's exactly what I said when we sort of introduced the study. Intonational things, higher level sentence intonation can obliterate the effects of lexical tone. So at the end of a sentence, you might not hear a tonal difference between toned and non-toned words, okay, with long vowels, because the final rise that you tend to get in that position is sort of is overriding which the rise you would see from a tone vowel, okay? If we look here in the medial position, we kind of see a cool effect here where focus, okay, seems to accentuate the effect of the tone. Okay, you get like a kind of a higher absolute pitch here, but also you get maybe a steeper rise and maybe a greater separation than with the non-toned words. And sort of the contour looks different. This is sort of interesting. We've seen this before. Like I mentioned, a given information, because it's previously been mentioned, tends to have depressed intonation, tends to be shorter in duration, for instance, and also have sort of contracted in other ways. Where if it's new information, you tend to, it's very often you'll find that phonetic contrasts are accentuated in sort of focused position. So new information has greater phonetic contrast. And maybe that's what we see here for the tone in Uspanteco, where you get maybe a more interesting pitch pattern here, where and the non-tonal word is just kind of flat, roughly flat. That's kind of cool. In final position, for focused information, I'm not sure what to say about this. This is kind of an interesting case. Clearly now the tone vowels are much higher. So we've seen this before. We might get an accentuation of the phonetic contrast in a focused position. But interestingly, you'll notice that we don't get a final rise anymore for the non-tonal word. In fact, just the absolute pitch is higher. So notice that like this one in medial position is like, this one given information is kind of, you get a rise, but if it's focused and in final position, it's just kind of flat and higher. But we don't know what to say about that. That's kind of an interesting fact. But still, we see a distinction where the toned vowel is even higher than that. Okay, so it's like lower and maybe obliterated, and then it's like way higher than everything. And the non-toned vowel in final position is just higher. But I think that the important takeaway here is I think we can see an effect of tone here. Like these toned words are systematically have higher pitch. Okay. So what have I hopefully shown you? There is tone in Uspanteco that appears on Ultimate More of Words. And we can actually measure the lexic, we can measure the phonetic effect of tone, but it's substantially affected by intonational contexts and also like things like focus and givenness. And it's detectable and measurable when we control for these factors, which is kind of nice to see. Some open questions: how do demographics affect tone, age, gender, town, and attrition? So we did not, we had some data that maybe gender matters. We don't really have a ton of speakers, so it's hard to do sort of rigorous statistics, but I think there is a trend that women might have more toned vowels than men do, at least in our study. There's probably effective attrition. This is something that we didn't control for. Like our graphs are maybe a little messy. You might like to see things even crisper. We didn't like pre-screen people and be like, oh, does that person really have tones or not? I mentioned that the system might be suffering from some attrition. It might be the case that some of the speakers in our in our study had less than robust tone systems, we just averaged their data, so that could cause some amount of variation. We probably have more variation in our data than we would if we sort of tried to find like the toniest speakers and only work with them. The reason we didn't do that is we didn't want to sort of prejudge things and be like, well, we're trying to study the phenomenon. We don't know much about it. Who are we to say who has tone or not, right? We're trying to sort of discover that. Okay, so I have a few more minutes, maybe 10 more before we have 15 minutes for questions. Maybe I'll even end a little early. I want to mention one other little study that we've been working on. I might not get through this entirely, but I think you'll be interested in it. So in Uspanteco also has robust patterns of syncope. Syncope basically means vowel deletion, though we'll ask how deleted are these vowels? And this vowel deletion interacts with tone. So this we've already seen, so I'll skip it. Stress is final. We've seen this before on penultimate syllables. When we have tone, you have a high rise.
Imbat.
Yeah. And tone and stress are restricted to a word final 2-syllable window. So stress is always final or penult. Tone is always final or penult. So they never occur anywhere else in the word. Yeah, we've seen this. That's just, I'm gonna skip this. Okay, so what's interesting about this then is when we have penultimate tone, we have trochaic footing. Once again, if you've done some poetics, right, you get da, da, like trochee. You have a trochee where the first syllable is stressed, the second one is not. Okay, and here's an example of that. Teachers will have an unstressed syllable and then a stressed one, oops, and then a final syllable. So,
Achtir. Achtir.
why is it? Oh, you'll hear first he says the word teacher and then he says the plural version. The plural version has the trochee, the final trochee. So
Achtir.
plain.
Achtir.
Yeah. Achtir, where you have penultimate stress. Here's another example. So here's an example where you have final stress. And what's interesting about this is that very often when stress is final, pretonic short vowels delete. Okay, so if you have a stress like syllable, 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 stress syllable, the one pretonic, the one right before the stress syllable often just goes away. So here's an example. Do I have a recording here? Why is it not playing a recording? Okay, maybe I don't. This vowel would disappear. Okay, very often. Here's an example. It's here, I can play this one. So it's the same word. She plays the marimba vowel, or he or she plays the marimba. This vowel disappears and it's right here. So this is where the O should be, but there's nothing there. And we can hear it.
Tik ohuman, tik ohuman, tik ohuman, tik ohuman, tik ohuman.
It's just man. There's just nothing there.
Tik ohuman.
Or it's quite little. Okay. Oh, sorry, that one does have it. What's wrong?
Tik ohuman.
This one does, and this one doesn't. My bad. This recording doesn't. You can hear this one has lost it. Same sentence.
Tig ochman. Tig ochman.
So tig och man. No vowel, no O. This one has the O.
Tik ohuman. Tik ohuman.
Tig ochman.
No O. So this vowel can delete. Okay, it can just disappear. And this is sort of what we're interested in. What's going on with these deleted vowels? And we're interested in it also because it interacts with the tone system. So here's an example of tone. When you have a toned vowel, this is an example. We have syllable, syllable, syllable. This one is tone. Tone attracts stress to the syllable. And then this vowel often deletes. So this is my bean in kinak. Here we have no ah. There's no ah here in kinak. It's just gone. Oops. This I don't have a recording of, but you can see it in here in the spectrogram. See how there's no noise here? This is like what a vowel looks like. There's all this periodic noise. There's just nothing there. Okay, and then there's the ah. Okay, so the vowel has just gone. And so tone causes stress shift, and then we delete the vowel that comes after the tone vowel. So this is where we're interested in. It interacts with tone in this cool way. Okay. So I'm gonna push on. A nagging question, and this is kind of why we're interested in it. Why is deletion so variable? So we can ask, is it part of sort of the symbolic phonology in the sense that is it, do speakers have a rule in their head that says delete that vowel and then they never go to pronounce it because the vowel's not there? Or is it better characterized as what we might call gestural overlap, right? As I'm speaking, something about those contexts that we just saw cause my consonant pronunciations to overlap a lot and the vowel kind of disappears. Okay, so is it sort of an instruction? Is it a phonological fact, or is it more like a narrow phonetic fact? That's sort of what we're interested in. Here's an example of that. So if we have sort of two consonants and a vowel, if they don't overlap, you will hear that vowel. If the consonants start to encroach on each other, if they start to be co-articulated, the vowel that used to be there would still be there in the phonology. The phonology would say, hey, I'm asking you to please pronounce this vowel. But due to the sort of context that vowel occurs in, those consonants have become so co-articulated that you don't hear the vowel anymore. Okay, and this is contrasted with true deletion, where there's just no vowel there, okay, in the underlying sort of phonology. I will, gives, I will, for the interest of time, I will get to our conclusion. Basically, this is what we think is correct. There's gestural overlap, okay, and the evidence is quite cool, so I will jump to that. So even though we cannot see those vowels in the spectrogram, right, I gave you examples of this back here. It doesn't look like there's a vowel here. What we decided to do a study was to see, are the speakers actually doing things articulatorily that suggest that they think a vowel is there? Okay, like, are they behaving? Is their body acting as if there's a vowel there? And we can test that in the following way. I will jump over this. We can test for this using, I just want to play these because it's really fun. Okay, the syncope can produce really good consonant clusters that are pretty rare cross-linguistically. So this is my hand, and you get this consonant cluster of an N, ejective uvular, and a implosive B. Okay, so it's just wild. It's really cool. That vowel is completely gone. Here's ear.
Chicken.
You have a consonant cluster of a KN cluster, which is interesting. This is a nice one yesterday.
You.
Yeah, this I is gone. And then here, my face. My face. So yeah, you just lost a lot of vowels, and you have this really nice cluster of like N, W, and cha. Okay, cool. How do we test this? We can test it using electroglottography. So this is my colleague Ryan. He's wearing this instrument that has two electrodes that try to pass a small electrical signal, electrical current from one to the other. And what happens is as your vocal folds close, the circuit is completed. So when your vocal folds are open, there's an air gap and the electrical current cannot get across the gap. But when your vocal folds close, the circuit is completed and the current can pass through. So we can measure the amount of your vocal folds opening and closing, okay? And that's cool because vowels, a sort of a canonical feature of vowels is that they have vocal fold vibrations. Okay, so we can test words like this. So chakach, dry. Here we have a Q, this ka. This sound is voiceless. Notice that there's no voicing here. There's very little energy down here, or no periodic bands. Like this periodic bands, here's a vowel. Periodicity in these bands indicates a vowel. So this is a vowel, this is a vowel, this is not a vowel, and this is also, it doesn't have those bands. So their vocal folds during this sound and this sound are not vibrating. Here, the vocal folds are vibrating. Okay, and you can see it in the spectrogram because it's audible. Here was an example where we had syncope, where we deleted a vowel. Chak, right here.
Chak.
There's no vowel there. Okay, that you can hear, and we can't see it in the spectrogram. We cannot detect it audibly. But okay, if we measure, let me go here. If we measure people's vocal fold vibrations, this is the exact token you just saw. You see this first vowel. This is now the electroglottography, right? We can detect the vocal folds opening and closing here for this first vowel. And look, in the second one, we still can detect the vocal folds opening and closing. So what can we take away from this? the speaker here is doing a vocal gesture. Like this vowel, I mean, this consonant here requires no vocal fold movement. This one requires no vocal fold movement. The fact that the speaker is doing vocal fold movement here tells us that that speaker in their mind, brain, in their language sort of ability, right? They know that there should be a vowel there and they are going to make it, or they're attempting to make it. Their vocal folds are vibrating here. Okay, but what happens is these two consonants are somehow overlapping for some reason that we're still trying to figure out. That the consonants are overlapping and they're obscuring that vowel. No one can hear it. Okay, you can't see it even like in the acoustic signal, right? You cannot, like even with sort of technology, I can't detect a vowel there. But physically, they are doing mechanically. We can detect their vocal folds vibrating here. So they're going to make a vowel. The vowel is not deleted. It's just like obscured. Okay, so that's sort of the final result. And so I'll end here. You've seen sort of two case studies of Uspanteco phonology. Syncope is pretty rare in sort of other Quichean languages, and the tone system is extremely rare. Sort of those things make Uspanteco sort of critically for understanding Mayan languages and their history. This is a critically endangered Mayan language, and it has this tone system, and we wonder, where did it come from? You know, what's its historical trajectory? Part of our project is sort of collecting the basic data that we might need for future generations to understand those puzzles. Okay, como. And we'd like to thank our Uspanteco speakers who participated in the study, and also for the Comunidad Lingüística Uspanteca for their support, and especially the ex-president Salvador Pinula Ical, and Alejandro Vasquez Tai, Deborah, and Rosa Lidia Akpop, who did really good work. They have participated in some studies, but also sort of helped run projects as well. So we thank them very much. And thank you all. I'm stopping sharing.
Thank you so much. We do have good time for questions. So I would invite people, if you would like to turn your cameras back on. You could either write questions in the chat or feel free just to raise your hand, and why don't I try to moderate, just Rob, so you don't have to be looking all over.
Okay.
But yeah.
I have it in gallery view so I can see everyone.
There is a question in the chat. A couple of questions are appearing in the chat. Robert, you can see those, right?
Yeah, I can see this one. So Ryan has a question about tonality with other Mayan languages. Ryan, ask your question.
Well, oops, sorry, I lost my video. It's just sort of the broader context of tonality and where it fits for Mayan languages. Maybe you can hypothesize a little bit, because so it's relatively rare if you don't include the 1 million or so Yucatec speakers.
Well, yeah.
Right?
So rare in terms of like languages in the family, not in terms of speakers, of course. Yeah.
No, that's right. But it's interesting that there's this huge division, right? That basically the lowland languages seem to have, or some of the lowland languages seem to have tonality.
So I can talk a little bit about like so we know where tone and Yucatecan languages came from. It comes from glottal stops. When you have a glottal stop, like so, like ka, glottal stops affect your pitch. And so very often what happens, a way for tones to enter a language is children, as they acquire the language, they don't hear that as a glottal stop. They think, oh, the cue, what I'm hearing is not a glottal stop. I'm going to key in on the pitch change. And then they sort of like lose the glottal stop and the pitch change becomes phonologized. So that's like a source of tone in Yucatecan. It's these laryngeal things, glottal stops and H's, that cause these tones to appear. Now, why did it happen in the lowlands? I mean, I don't think we know. That's probably, I think a linguist would be inclined to say it's a historical accident, right? Like, you know, it just happened. You know, people are predisposed to hearing these glottals as tones. And it just so happened in sort of ancestors of these lowland languages. But it is interesting that you find little pockets of this, right? I've mentioned Kunanteco, Uspanteco. People have said there's some dialects of Tseltal that maybe have tone. Some dialects of Mam might have incipient tone systems. They're not nearly as robust as the lowland tone systems. So, you know, maybe what's happening here is that there is a kind of foment, right? Like the language, you know, there is this, Mayan languages have a lot of these glottal expressions. And there is sort of churn in the system that sort of invites a listener to hear a tone. And maybe this has popped up in certain dialects and maybe died out, or pops up in a few places, and it just stuck in Yucatec. I think that would be my explanation for that, or what I think is going on.
Yeah. There's another question in the chat.
Why is Quiche more widely spoken than other Mayan languages? I don't know. I mean, I guess I would say that there is, I don't know why this would be, but the Quiche actually had a very strong and powerful empire. The Uspanteco, were a vassal state. Uspantan was a vassal state of the wider Quiche Empire at some point. I would say Quiche is widely spoken because it was an imperial language.
Robert, I have two questions that relate to the, I'll just go ahead and then we'll get to Stephanie. The two questions that relate to the recent social history of Uspanteco. One is that I know that Uspantan was a region of Guatemala that was heavily affected by the Civil War, and a lot of people were displaced, and some people were displaced up into the mountains. And so one is, I'm wondering if you know anything about that recent history of mass displacement and how it might have affected the language. And then the other question is, you mentioned at the end the Comunidad Lingüística Uspanteco, and I'm wondering if you could tell us maybe a little bit about the work that they are doing in the community to revive the language or teach the language. Thanks.
Yeah, that's great. So as far as sort of recent history, yeah, I think it would be, I think it's, no one has done a sort of deep sociological work on this, on sort of the history of those times. But I think it's pretty clear that, yeah, it definitely had an effect on the language, right? People being displaced. We do have some stuff. So part of our project is collecting stories, collecting narratives, and we do have stories of people talking about those times, or in relation to place names. So we have a lot of there's a town called Quisalch, which is and that's the location where there was a massacre, and people have sort of talked about sort of historical events happen in town, because there are sort of contemporary place names in Uspanteco that relate to events during the violence. And yeah, I don't think we fully understand that. I would say that sort of post, sort of the biggest effect on Uspantan, on the language, is that sort of post 1980 or so, they completed sort of more highway going between Coban and Quiche, and there's lots and lots of immigrant Quiche into Uspantan, a lot. And so that's really what's driving sort of this demographic shift where children are learning Quiche. Historically, it was a really, an Uspanteco town, and people spoke Quiche because they would go to Santa Cruz to sell things. Now it's there's a lot of monolingual Quiche speakers in Uspantan coming because, they're looking for farmland. They're coming because, there's the highway there. And it's created a very interesting sociolinguistic situation where Uspanteco is incredibly endangered. Everyone speaks Quiche, is married to, has Quiche relatives. But in general, the Uspanteco people are much more wealthy than the Quiche people in the region, because they're sort of recent immigrants, and so a lot of the Uspanteco families have much more land, much better off. So they're sort of socioeconomically on top, but linguistically on the bottom. And so it's a very, very interesting sort of sociolinguistic situation that I'm not a sociolinguist, and I really, really want people to go work on this and think about it. But yeah, it's a sort of a very dynamic and interesting scenario. Someone asked, I'll talk about the Comunidad Lingüística in 1 second. Someone just asked how many Uspanteco speakers in the US. I have no idea. I would love to know. But I know some people in Houston, but I don't know more broadly. Yeah.
Stephanie, go ahead. And then at the end, Robert, if you could go back to the Comunidad Lingüística.
Yeah, I'll do that.
But Stephanie, go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for your talk. I just wanted to see if you would let us know a little bit more about the sort of cultural preservation or linguistic preservation projects you're a part of. And I was kind of most specifically sort of struck by this, what you were talking about in terms of the sort of attrition of the tonal versus non-tonal versions. And was kind of curious, like how you determine sort of value. Like, of course, languages are living, breathing, always changing things in the world. And so I was sort of curious about your thinking or in dialogue with the community members about how you place value on certain versions of language versus others, and what sort of cultural preservation is coming from the communities versus sort of being, ideas about preservation brought from the outside. And so I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah,
I mean, so it's quite interesting. So we're not, we're definitely not sort of directing these kinds of efforts in the community. As we mentioned, the Comunidad Lingüística is sort of constitutionally given the power over the language in these communities. And so the Comunidad Lingüística is doing things like teacher training. They are training bilingual teachers. There's some requirement that like civil servants have to study some amount of Uspanteco. You have to know some amount of the languages of the communities that you're working in. So they offer classes for like professionals, right? If you want to work at the municipal building, you have to take an Uspanteco class, basically. So Meg Harvey, who's one of our grad students on this project, because during COVID times, they've been doing them over Zoom, she took like her like professional Uspanteco class at the Comunidad Lingüística. And so she's certified to like be a public servant in Uspantan, which is kind of cool. But I think the Comunidad Lingüística is primarily doing things like supporting bilingual teachers in the sort of rural schools, also putting on sort of bigger cultural events. So they have like a Dia de, I don't know, the Dia de Libros or something like this. I forgot the name of it. But part of that is like the children like put on plays in Uspanteco and they give awards to like the best play, the best song, that kind of stuff. So they put on sort of cultural language and cultural events. And that's primarily, I would say their primary focuses are in producing teaching materials and training teachers. As far as sort of values, the tone system is not valued very much at all. Which kind of makes sense, actually. It's like, that's like a pretty low level thing. People care much more, in my experience, about like words. Like we say, rip, and which for bat, and the Quiche say, tsots, like that's what they're excited about, like lexical differences and grammatical differences. So the tones in the sort of standard orthography are not even written. So this is just not valued really at all. But it's not to say that they don't, are not interested in it. It's just they're not like trying to be like save the tones of Uspanteco. That's like they're not interested in that.
Yeah, that's what I was sort of wondering. Is there like a politics to bring back the tone? But it sounds like not so much.
Not so much. Yeah, not so much. And I think partially because many of the people don't have it. Like even people who work at the Comunidad Lingüística, it's not even part of their language, especially like the younger people. And the sort of, once again, the sociolinguistic situation is extremely interesting in that, the president before the president we worked with on this project, he said, explicitly, he's like, I am Uspanteco and I'm Quiche. So a lot of people have like a dual identity, so I feel like the Uspanteco language, is probably, I think it's heavily mixing with Quiche, and maybe it'll just end up being at some point like a dialect of Quiche or something that they speak in Uspantan, which is probably the end result of sort of the trajectory of the language. But but who knows? As far as what we're doing, we have a couple projects. So we're creating a lot of these narratives that are annotated and for linguistic annotations, also for phonological stuff. At the end of this project, it's going to be the best phonetically documented Mayan language, which we're very excited about. And we're, of course, sharing these with the Comunidad Lingüística. Also, every year of their project, we put on workshops that they asked for. So we'd say, like, what do you feel like? What skills do we have that we can share with you? And like, for instance, people there were really interested in sort of immersive teaching methods. So like doing stuff with like full body immersion kind of stuff. And our grad student is an expert in that. And we put on a workshop on how to teach, without a textbook, doing sort of full body kind of immersive learning. We ran a phonetics workshop because they didn't know anything about phonetics or phonetics software. So we've been putting on sort of technical workshops for people there. And then finally, we're now working on making some teaching materials. We have a guy, Tomas Mendez Lopez, who's a local school teacher who's been working on our project. And one thing he wants to do is start to develop a curricula for Uspanteco for ages 10 to 17. the Comunidad Lingüística has made sort of teaching materials for elementary school age, but not for older kids. So we're trying to find a way, we're working with him to maybe make sort of teaching materials for older kids. So those are sort of our major projects.
Great. Thank you so much, Robert. So we are out of time, but I'm wondering, before we sign off, before you leave, for the students in the audience, could you just say really, really quickly something about the course in Mayan languages that you'll be teaching next year?
Yeah, so next year, the plan is to teach this Introduction to Mayan Languages course. And the goal is really twofold. There's so many Mayan languages, they're all quite beautiful. And my hope is that all of you go out and learn as many of them as you can. The idea behind the class would be to give people a linguistic background to make that language learning easier. So Mayan languages, if you haven't studied them, have sounds you may not be familiar with and not apparent in sort of not in sort of Western European languages. They have grammatical constructions that are not in sort of Western European languages, except for maybe Basque. But they are grammatically quite different than languages you might be familiar with. So the hope would be to give you a linguistic sort of base that you could go out and learn any Mayan language that you want from like a higher, you have a higher starting point. Additionally, the course is going to focus on Quiche. And so we'll be sort of learning sort of elementary sort of Quiche. So you'll get a chance to like use these sounds, actually, learn how to produce sentences using these grammatical concepts through Quiche, but it's meant to be much more broad. So it's not a strict like, a Quiche 101 class. So if you want to like go learn Yucatec, I think this class would also be helpful, so that's sort of the goal. Yeah.
Marcela, go ahead.
Yes, I would just like to say thank you, Robert. That was a great talk. Very, very linguistic oriented.
Oh, okay.
Which is great for linguistics, for those who are really interested in linguistics. No, I think it's absolutely wonderful. And I just want to say that, the course that Robert is going to be teaching and other courses that we're going to be developing on issues of also other issues related to Central America, not just language, but also cultural understandings of Central American, different indigenous groups, of issues that are happening as a result of armed conflict. So we have a variety of events and courses that we're going to be offering as part of a Central America program that we're developing, thanks to funding from the Department of Education. We got a undergraduate international studies and foreign language grant. So a lot of this is also going to focus on undergraduate students who are interested in Central America. Please contact Liz, Robert, myself at the Center for Latin American Studies, and we will be happy to guide you. We have a great study abroad in Guatemala. We also have, many of you know, a lot of local groups that have been working in Central America for decades. We work with them so we can connect you. There's a lot that is happening. We have some resources and we would love to share them and to include you if this is a topic that really, whether from a linguistics perspective, from a cultural perspective, which is also linguistics, or because you are concerned about what is happening in Central America. In any case, we're here and we have resources for undergraduate students, also for faculty, and for grad students through other grants as well. Thank you. Thanks, Robert.
Yes, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.
Tawi Live.